for everyone that waited for your patience. We will roll in and get started to our work session on November 7th, 2023, and move to our report by the city manager, David Cook.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. Let's see, we have an upcoming event. It is Municipal Court Week, and I'm going to call on Juan Paredes to give us an update on what will happen.
All right, good afternoon, Mayor and Council. So this last legislative session was declared the first full week of November, Municipal Court Week. So it is an opportunity for us to recognize the role that the judiciary plays in maintaining safe communities and appreciate our clerk staff, our judges, marshals, and all of our support staff. So we do have a fun week of events planned out. You should have received the agenda. Just yesterday, we had our opening ceremony, so thank you to ACM Washington for coming out to support and providing some kind words and recognition for our staff. That's always appreciated. Thank you. Tomorrow, we are also hosting our recognition ceremony for our staff that has served with us so faithfully for several years, and several that have attained their municipal court certification, which is a significant accomplishment. As you may have noticed, we also have food trucks at the front. Everybody hopefully takes advantage of those. So we would love for you to come down and participate in any of the events. We'd love to host you and tell you a little bit more about what we do at Municipal Court. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Any questions, council? No, you got off easy. Thank you very much for your hard work.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
All right, next we have a few informal reports. The first informal report is sales tax revenue update from August 2023. And Clay Pearson's available if there are any questions. Moving on, the next one is on the Business Equity Program. And we have Gwen Wilson from Diversity and Inclusion.
Yeah.
If there are any questions.
Yes, please.
All right, Gwen.
I requested this, and thank you so much for pulling it together. I think it'd just be helpful to give an overview first, and then I think I have one follow-up question.
Okay, I'm sorry, I didn't hear your question.
Oh, no question. Just give us an overview first, and then I'll follow up with a question.
Oh, okay. All right. As you all may have read, our business equity program was born out of a disparity study. And the purpose of the disparity study is to determine if there are any disparities in our procurement process as it relates to business equity firms, and there were disparities determined. We have a narrowly tailored program that is race conscious. We found that minority and women business enterprises were not equitably getting contracts. Therefore, each year now we create reports, we track our spend with these groups. Last year, we were very successful with African Americans. 4 years ago, we were at less than 1%. We've increased up to 6% as of 2022. With Hispanics this year, we've exceeded our goal. At 9.2%, we're at 9.84%. So we are seeing improvements. One of the things that we have seen this year in our numbers is that even though we had a higher percentage last year at 20%, we went down to 17% this year, but that's because we may have given out more contracts, but the value of those contracts were significantly less. So 2023 did show small drop in percentages.
Thank you. And then just one follow-up question. You know, for me at least, the goal is ensuring that as we're awarding these contracts, that the business equity is proportionate to our demographics as a city, that put in other words, that the way we do business is reflective of the people that we serve in the community. What are some things that y'all are thinking about as a department in striving towards ensuring that there is equity and that we see a better proportionality between our population and the way we're awarding business.
Okay, our business equity goals are not set by the population. It's based on the availability of business equity firms within the marketplace. So the study was instrumental in showing us how many MWBEs are within the marketplace. So that's how it's based on. It's not based on the community itself or the demographics. It's based on strictly how many firms are located within that market area by ethnicity.
That's helpful to know too. The availability is an important aspect to, I guess, ultimately get into that proportionality. How are y'all working to kind of assist with that availability? I know there's some criteria that MBEs, particularly one being that they have to serve in the market or have a location in the market. How are y'all working towards increasing availability?
We do a lot of networking with our advocacy partners, but additionally, one of the big events that we have is we have a partnership with the Beck Group of Construction. And so it is the first construction school of its type in Fort Worth. So that was something that we came together with, where they teach MBEs about construction and estimating and so forth. So we've had some successes in that program with the MBEs that have gone through that program and growing MBEs. The other thing is, like I said, we have these relationships with all these groups around the Metroplex. I think we participated in over 100 events in the past 2 years. So we've been pretty active in the community and working with different groups.
That's awesome. Thank you. I commend y'all for the work that y'all do. As it relates to city management, I think this is a huge opportunity for us to continue building on that progress by ensuring that we're helping incubate businesses so that there is a better pool of businesses so that we can, continue to move the needle on these goals. But thank you for this report. I appreciate you.
Okay.
Any other
Thank you.
questions, council? Thank you, Gwen. Appreciate it.
All right, our next informal report is on the Chief Judge Judicial Recruitment and Appointment Process. And we have our Municipal Court Chief Judge, Danny Rogers, available to ask any questions.
Any questions for Danny?
I don't have any
Elizabeth?
questions. I just, well, really one, what does he think he's doing leaving? So, that's it. You can sit down.
And then finally, we have an informal report on the fiscal year 2023 tax increment financing annual report. And Robert Stearns is available if there are any questions.
No questions.
All right, Mayor, that concludes my report.
Okay, we're rolling on. Our next item is any questions regarding changes in memberships on boards or commissions that'll be addressed on November 14th. Moving to any questions regarding significant zoning cases for the upcoming council meeting. And any questions regarding the city council M&C log for November 14th? No? Perfect. Our first presentation today is by it says Executive Assistant Chief. I like that. I almost said Executive Assistant. Chief Robert Aldridge to talk about filling our police vacancies. Chief, you're up.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Good afternoon. It's great to be in front of you guys again. If you guys remember, this is a follow-up on an IR informal report that was given about a month ago. You're not going to have as many stats as that report has, and I would ask you if you have some of those questions, we can definitely answer them today. My hope is I clear the muddy water a little bit. There were some additional questions. That's why I'm standing before you today. So one of our biggest challenges for us right now is determine what positions that we fill and what positions do we remain vacant until our staffing improves. Currently, we have 211 vacant positions in our department. That includes the 63 new positions that you guys authorized on October 1st. We also have 29 probationary officers that are in training that does not include into our staffing numbers right now because they are not cut loose. I want to add a little nuance here because we have about, on average, about 80-plus personnel that are on light duty or O days that kind of equate to this problem as well. So how and when vacancies occur is a constantly changing target for us. So it really depends on retirements, resignations, disciplinary terminations, medical separations, promotions, you name it. There is a gamut of things that are variables kind of outside of our control. Now, there are a couple of things that we can predict. We can predict promotion or retirements if we get enough notice from the officers when they retire, or for promotions because we know how many people we're going to promote. But whenever somebody promotes or separates from the department, it could be from a patrol position or from a specialized position. It's not necessarily from one group or another. And that's why, for us, that variable continues to move. So due to the randomness, there is not a hard set plan of how we fill vacancies on a day-to-day basis. So there are several contractual and legal things that we must do whenever we fill vacancies. One of them is the school resource officers. We have a contract with school resource that we are going to have those positions filled, and that is in the contract that it has to remain staffed so we can be in the schools to help protect the children. The others are promotions. That's governed by Texas Local Government Code, Chapter 143, that there are timelines that we have to promote people whenever those vacancies occur in those ranks. So outside of those two, there's a lot of other things that we look at whenever we deal with transfers within the department. So the mass majority of our transfers occur whenever a recruit class is about to get cut loose. When they're done with that field training, we give them the keys to the car and they can go out and answer a call by themselves. So as that class approaches their graduation date, we sit down as an executive staff, and this is kind of a list that we look at. The priority of the positions needed, the negative impact on leaving the position vacant, the impact on filling one position over another, total vacancy rate for each unit, and the overall goals of the department for filling or leaving a position vacant. And so for us, you know, the priorities of our department and the vacancy we have in certain units, again, change sometimes from month to month, sometimes from week to week. So it's really kind of challenging for us to stand up here and tell you, I'm going to fill this unit on this date, I'm going to fill this other unit on another date. So looking at this slide, I want people to understand patrol is the backbone of our department. We need patrol officers to be out there answering 911 emergency calls. That is our highest priority. We want to keep them as fully staffed as we can without depleting the other units in our department to be able to accomplish the mission that you guys have tasked us to do. So our next highest priority is, of course, our violent crime initiative. We want to make sure that we have a safe, clean, and green city. That's very important. That's our mantra that we've done throughout our whole budget process, and safety of that is extremely important. So right now, our vacancy rate is about 11.25%. That's with the positions added. If you don't add the 63 positions, we would have been at 8%. We reached out to a couple other departments because if you guys listen to me in some of the community budget conversations, we kind of had this conversation about what is our vacancy rate compared to other departments. So Harris County Sheriff's Department has a vacancy rate of about 14%. They have 317 vacancies. Austin, we did an internet search, and the best that we could tell, their vacancy rate's about 18%. Houston PD has 1,273 vacancies at a vacancy rate of 20%. So if you go out of the state of Texas, let's look at Atlanta. Atlanta has over 500 vacancies, 26% vacancy rate. Phoenix has over 500 vacancies at an 18% vacancy rate. Boston has 700 vacancies at a 34% vacancy rate. And then New Orleans has over 700 vacancies for a 44% vacancy rate. Yes, ma'am. No, this is just information that I wanted to kind of share with you guys without kind of throwing it up here, because that's a lot of numbers and that's a lot of things to kind of wrap your head around. And the whole point I want to try and make is that although our numbers may look bleak to some, when you compare them to other departments, it's really not as bad as you think. So we're really doing pretty well. So to show that there's hope on the horizon, we have recruit class 156. They have 48 recruits that are in there currently. Some of you guys attended the graduation of recruit class 155 that put 20 new recruits in the field. Lateral Class 8 has 17 recruits that are in there. Class 157, which started on Monday, has 45 recruits. We plan on starting another lateral academy class spring of '24, and then Class 158 should be starting around July of 2024. And our hope is, we just had a testing cycle go, or at least application cycle, and I'll share the demographic numbers with you guys a little bit later in the slides, but we would like to get another large class put into Class 158. That's kind of our goal. So, again, if all separations from the department were planned out, we could easily have a easy-to-follow replacement process. Unfortunately, that's not the case. Every command level in our department is experiencing vacancies, to include the HOPE team, crisis intervention, MPOs, the traffic unit, and they all have very legitimate needs. We do our best to share the burden amongst these vacancies across the department and fill our vacancies with the ever-changing priorities given to our department. I did reach out to Assistant Chief Joe Sparrow, and we are going to be at least posting for 2 positions in the HOPE team, because we know that there are quite a few vacancies there. So there is some hope in that area. I know that Assistant Chief Sparrow also mentioned how we were going to manage the CIT team, which was, we're going to select them, train them, they're going to stay in patrol until our staffing gets better to incorporate them into the unit. So I know there's questions, but one of the things I wanted to kind of throw out there, some of the changes that we made to the academy to make our academy a little bit more efficient, to get our officers out on the street a little bit quicker. I'm not going to read this slide. I violated every PowerPoint rule there was. But I think it's very, very important that we kind of highlight just some of these aren't even all the changes that we made. We changed the physical standards for our incoming recruits, and that was for Class 157 that started on Monday. And we saw a vast improvement from 157 compared to when 156 started. We only had about 6 people fail the run, whereas for Class 156, that was a double-digit number. So we're very pleased with the outcome of some of our physical fitness standards, that we're not going to lose those people, you know, in that accord. One of the other good things is we partnered with Frontline. Frontline does a much more comprehensive physical and mental evaluation for incoming officers, and they have been able to catch some severe health-related issues on some of the recruits that have applied. In fact, there's one that, I mean, they probably saved his life because he had a heart disease or heart issue that he did not know about. So for me, nothing against Hughley. It just seems like Frontline is able to pick out some more serious issues and maybe some underlying issues that need to be addressed before they go through the academy. So one of the last things I want to share with you guys is the demographic report from our most recent application process. We had 1,149 applicants for the trainee. If you look at the diversity numbers, extremely diverse. One of our biggest challenges is to get the number of people that applied to come and sit for the test. Because percentage-wise, we only get about 45% of these individuals sit for the test. So my hope is you guys approve the recruiting unit. That recruiting unit is going to be reaching out to these individuals to try and keep them engaged, encouraged, that we can increase that number of people that are sitting for the test, because the more people we have sitting for the test, the more pool of applicants I have to put into a large class. So on the left-hand side is our lateral officer program. We got 69 applicants out of that. And so, again, I'm very impressed with the diversity of those numbers. And so with that, I'll open it up for questions.
I don't have any questions. I just really want to applaud everything you're doing to look at that demographic report, specifically the trainees, and to see what is true diversity, not just, you know, we've upped our numbers, but I'm looking at almost equal applicants. And so whatever you're doing, good job and keep it up.
Appreciate that.
Thank you. Thank you, Chief, for this presentation. I was one of the ones that wanted this IR and then wanted the presentation for more clarity. I think one of the issues that I was at a community meeting, and we talked about how is CIT and HOPE team being improving with the vacancies, and you answered those questions today, and so I'm excited about that. And I think that you have a council here that's willing to support police, and so I don't think it's a question about the issue with vacancies, just how they'll feel.
Yes.
So I appreciate your report today. And maybe if I'm not here too long, back in the day when I was a little kid, I used to want to be a police officer. but I grew up in mom didn't want me to do that. So if I'm still in young, good health, when I leave here, maybe I will apply.
Come on over.
All right, we'll see.
I don't know, I heard your speech at Center for Transforming Lives, and you admitted to a bunch of people that maybe you'd had some issues in fourth grade. Okay.
Well, yeah, there are some issues there.
And
Gina.
I would like to say, these numbers aren't just from our efforts, they're from your efforts as well. I mean, it takes a team effort for us to get these people to apply, to want to be police officers in this great city. We have the best department in the world, there's no doubt in my mind. It's just I need to open up everybody's eyes and want to be a part of the team.
Chief,
before you
I
leave,
just want to be able to, the mayor called my name, so I'll go. I want to thank you for the strides and improvements the department has made. You'll recall a few years ago, after the George Floyd incident, we were losing applicants of color.
Yes, ma'am.
I think there was one who was ready to take off, but when it happened, we had 3 that time. And so your department has certainly made an improvement in diversity, and I'm just looking forward to the day when we don't even have to worry about it anymore. But kudos to you guys, and thank you for all what you do.
It's a definitely team effort.
go ahead, Michael.
To that end, I just want to know what the process is. Again, appreciate all the, applaud the efforts. If we're really concentrating on minorities and recruiting minorities into it, what do we do with the people that don't make that class? How do we keep them engaged over, especially those target areas, target populations that
So
we're,
I'm glad that you asked
sorry to get in
that.
the weeds, but I think it.
No,
I just wanna
that is a phenomenal question. So we realize just because they may not be able to pass the test doesn't mean they're not viable applicants. We have applicants that come time and time again, and we want to work with them. And so one of the things that we're instituting, and the one thing we did for class 157, was that we kind of had family training days once a month. We invited the families to come down. We went through the physical assessment with the applicants. And so what we're going to do is we're going to incorporate people that may not have passed the test and try and still keep them engaged with activities that we have on campus to keep them energized to hopefully be able to take another test and try and get on our department.
Do we give them guidance on why they didn't pass?
Oh,
the test, so we
absolutely.
work through that process?
Yeah,
if they
we
didn't
tell them
physical-
whatever stage of the process they were eliminated, what they need to work on, and if they need help with physical fitness, our physical fitness coordinator has no problem giving them a training plan and helping them along the way.
That's perfect. Thanks for getting, looking at that from a whole different perspective. Appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yes, Chief, Michael actually touched on a couple things that were related to what I was going to ask, so I'll change mine up a little bit. When it comes to the physical tests, okay, that they don't pass, how has that changed? You mentioned the classes from one class to another, how you've implemented some changes.
Yes.
What changes have you made? I mean, I can look up some basic standards across, the nation of what physical test requirements are
Yes.
for police officers. In our department, what has changed from one class to another?
So you're talking just the physical standards or?
Yes, just
Okay,
the physical.
so the physical standards prior to class 156, so this was the first class we changed the physical requirements. Prior to that, we had to do a physical assessment test. It basically is an obstacle course. It's a 2-minute and 30-second, you jump over a fence, you climb up and down stairs, you pull a dummy, and really most anybody can struggle for 2 minutes and 35 seconds through that test and make it. What we were finding out is, once we put them on the track to try and make them run a mile, mile and a half, they can't make it a quarter of a mile without stopping and walking. Well, part of our physical fitness training is for our CT/DT training, our control tactics, because we don't want them to get hurt. We want them to be in pretty good physical shape, so because they're going to do a lot of physical activities on the mat. So the physical fitness training isn't necessarily to get them in great shape, it's to keep them in shape to a fitness level so they do not get hurt in our training. So what has changed is they have to do a 1.5-mile run, they have to do push-ups and set-ups, and they have to do a 500-meter row. So everybody thinks, oh my God, 1.5-mile run. The times are not what you think they are. So to get into the academy, they have to run 1.5 miles in 17:51. So they only have to do 11 push-ups, 22 set-ups, and do the 1.5-mile row in 2 minutes and 25 seconds. The 500-meter row in 2 minutes and 25 seconds. So as long as they can meet that requirement, then that is a very baseline for us to get started with. Now, in the academy, day one, our standards are raised a little bit, and so we want them to be able to run 1.5 miles in 14:33, and be able to do, I think it's 17 push-ups, 27 set-ups, and do the 500-meter row in 2 minutes and 7 seconds. So, but even if they don't pass that, it's okay. That's a guiding post to show them this is where we're going to get you to. And so we want them, that's the whole point of the training with them in the summertime, or at least over the months leading up to the academy, so they know what to expect whenever they get into the academy. Because getting past the application process is one thing, but we want them to be realistic about what the physical rigors are of the academy.
Thanks, Chief. Think it's a good idea. Thanks.
Questions for Chief? No. Excellent presentation, Chief.
Thank you.
Very much. Appreciate you. Okay, council, next up is Victor Turner, our Neighborhood Services Director, to talk to us about the 2024 Housing Tax Credit Policy. Media's leaving. Are you offended, Victor?
No.
And he's wrapping up the cord. No tax credit for you.
Mayor, you see that slide?
Yes.
You know where that's from?
I do know where that is. It's excellent.
Good afternoon, Mayor, Council. I was going to say after the push-ups and sit-ups, I'm done. So you won't have to worry about it. So anyway, every year we come before you with our proposed tax credit policy. You all are very familiar with this process. During the competitive 9% credits this time of the year, you'll be getting letters from various developers about projects that they want to do in Fort Worth. This program is administered nationally by the IRS, and then each state housing finance agency allocates the tax credits. So why do we have the policy? One, so we're not subjective in our decision-making. Every major city has some type of policy as it relates to tax credits and deals that are coming into their city. You can see also this is a TDHCA requirement that there's a percentage of the units that are at 0 to 30. And then we also try to align our policies every year with the state's policy to try to reflect any changes that they may have. So you'll hear us come to you with two different types of credits. During this time of the year, it's a competitive round. That's the 9% credits. And then the 4% they can apply anytime during a year. We are making some changes, so it just doesn't come in randomly on the 4%. But the main differences are the amount of equity that's generated by the two 4 and the 9% programs, and also with the 4% bond financing is included as part of it. I'm not going to bore you with this one because it is a more complicated process than on this slide. But basically, developers apply the credits. Each state right now, I believe, is $2.95 per capita that's provided to the state for tax credits to allocate. And so you take out grants and you take out land as part of the process in calculating those credits, and you multiply by various fractions and come up with the credits, multiply that over 10 years, and that's how they get that equity. This is the process. As I mentioned already, IRS, the developers apply to the state. The state has what's called a qualified allocation plan. So you hear staff talking about QAP. So when they say QAP, that's what that means. That is their guidelines. Each state develops that for the developers to apply for the credits. Not much difference between a 9 and a 4, as I mentioned, other than bond financing is included as part of the 4%, as well as it's not as much equity generated. So this is a list of projects that we funded over the years. You can see last year we had quite a few, and I believe over the last 8 years, we've had 42 new developments in Fort Worth. So this goes a long ways in helping us meet our affordable housing shortage. And so you can see some years we don't get as many as others. Looking on the right side, that column, the competitive round, as you can see in 2018, there was just only one project in Fort Worth. But it did improve last year. One thing I want to mention, the 9% we compete regionally with Dallas and other areas in the DFW, and the 4% is statewide. So the resolutions, which is what we're here to talk about, you either get a resolution of support, a resolution of no objection, or no resolution at all. And so you can see what is required to get each one of those. The units at 0 to 30, if they're in a high opportunity area, which generally is better schools, higher income, those areas that we look to fund projects. course, you have to get a notification, council, the neighborhood association, homeowner associations as well. And then last year, there was an intent, if they wanted to seek funding from us, they would have to notify NSD. We had a forum on October 3rd at Como Community Center with developers that are around the state and country that are interested in applying in Fort Worth. You can see the two options. One, if they set aside 10% of their units, affordable units, as deeply affordable, that is a state requirement. Fort Worth goes a little bit further. We say 10% of your total units. So we're getting more affordable units than even what the state requires when there's a project in Fort Worth. The notifications, previously it was a 1/4 mile distance. We've increased that to a 1/2 mile to be consistent with what we do in zoning. The notifications, you can see developers want to do electronic and just email only. We ask that they do both. So electronic notification as well as snail mail, hard copy. And then other things we looked at, as I mentioned, the qualified allocation plan. Fort Worth is part of a group called Texas Housing Group with other large cities in Fort Worth. So we compare notes and talk to them about their policies as it relates to tax credits. And then we also consulted with Fort Worth Lab and City Manager's Office and Council.
Real quickly, go back to that slide. It says developers ask staff to revise the 10% set-aside rule, expressing concern. Kind of dig deeper into that conversation and what led to that.
Yeah, so they didn't want to have to do as many of those as we require. As you can see on option B, it says 10% of total units, whereas the state requirement is only 10% of the deeply affordable, 0 to 30. So that's the difference. So we didn't really change anything in our policy, but they wanted us. So for example, in the tax credit developments, there may be 20% of the units at 50% of AMI or 40% at 60% of AMI. So they can just do 10% of that smaller number, and we say 10% of the total.
Of the total number. Okay,
So we get more.
right. And they still push back on that?
Yeah, I mean, but it's our practice that we've been doing every year.
Good, okay.
Yeah. So this particular slide, some of the changes, we put a limit on the amount of fee waivers. Previously, there was no limit, so we're putting a cap at 30,000. Also, we will not waive transportation or wastewater impact fees. And then this year, as part of some legislation passed on a state level related to park dedication fees that basically put some limitations in place that goes into effect, I believe, January. We'll have to comply with that.
Can you speak more to that, Leanne or Victor, on the HB 1526 or whoever had to follow that? Thanks, Richard.
Good afternoon, Richard Zavala, Park and Recreation Department. Yes, the legislature did pass House Bill 1526. The governor signed it into law, and we must be in compliance beginning January 1 of 2024. You have an M&C coming on your agenda next week for you to make the changes in accordance with the state legislation. We're compelled to do it. The main impact on us is how we handle multifamily housing, how we compute that different from the current park dedication policy and what's going to be required under the state law. So it is going to have an impact.
What's the bottom line impact, though, look like?
We usually get about, I think it's 14,000 per unit, and it's going to drop us down to about 5,000. There's a table in the M&C that gives you that. The other thing we have to do is, rather than fair market value, we have to do land value, and we have to do it over a 10-year average based on the appraisal district wherever the property is located.
Okay.
So there are a couple of other things like that that are affecting us, but nonetheless, it's now part of the local government code, and we must comply.
Okay.
I believe there's a 10% limitation total, and you have to designate the entire city as central business district, urban or suburban, and that affects some of what you can charge.
Okay, thank you.
That last bullet is something that was in practice anyway about hold harmless for zoning. So in TDHCA's QAP, it basically says you can't hold the city liable if you don't get zoning for one of these projects. So now We're just putting that letter in up front versus asking later in the process. I already talked about expanding the boundary from a fourth mile to a half a mile. On the 4%, I previously mentioned they could apply anytime during the year. Now we're going to have deadlines quarterly. So once it'll be a little bit, for one, it'll be a little bit more orderly for us. We won't get developers coming in at the last minute and say they need this to go to council in 2 weeks, 3 weeks, so we'll be able to plan better. Remove requirement to request funding up front. We have very limited funding right now, so we've taken that out this year. We really don't have anything to loan or grant, so we've taken that out. And then we moved the deadline up a week to align with council meetings. This is the requirements this year. The only difference between this table and the previous one I showed you is that where the language is stricken at the bottom about the intent to seek HFC or city money, since we won't have any available to loan or grant. Same process here with community engagement. They notify neighborhood services on their intent to apply. We do a map, provide that to community engagement staff. They go through the process of notifying those neighborhood associations, and then the developer has to have at least one meeting. It could be virtual or in person. And if there's no neighborhood association within a half mile, they're not required to have a meeting. So here we are, November 14th, November 7th for next week, November 14th, you all's approval. The deadline to notify council is December 6th. Deadline for them to host a meeting and get applications in to us is January 5th. And then February 6th will be recommendations and council approval on the 13th. And I believe the deadline to TDACA is March 1st. This is what I mentioned earlier about the quarterly deadlines for the 4% tax credits. So you can see how they're spread out quarterly. So you won't be seeing any of those right away, but just periodically during the year on a quarterly basis. Finally, next steps, next week, the policy for you all consideration and approval, and all the other deadlines that I mentioned on that graph previously. Questions?
Any questions for Victor? Go ahead, Michael.
Victor, you're expanding the neighborhood association a quarter of a mile to half a mile. Also, there's meetings to be held. How is this, that's obviously going to create more work in your office. I'm just curious how the staffing is in your office at this point that will be able to handle this increased workload.
Yeah, it'll be fine. Community engagement works with us very closely on that. And so it's just a matter of being able to reach some of those neighborhood associations that are kind of close. And so that's why we're expanding it, also to be consistent with what the practice is with zoning.
Okay. I just know it's been a problem in the past connecting with neighborhoods. So just to make sure
Sometimes.
we're working together on that. Thank you.
Any other questions from council? No. Great job, Victor. Thank you very much. Well, that was fast. Council, request for future agenda items or reports. Gina.
I'd like for staff to look into what it would take to change our municipal elections for November. And that, you know, we hear all the time about low voter turnout. We know that if we were to hold local elections in November, we would have more people voting. So I didn't mean to shock everybody, but that's my future agenda item.
Thank you, Gina. Alan, did you have your hand up or no? Jeanette.
I have 3 things. So this would be code and animal control. What are we doing about controlling our cat population? And what can we do to help the situation, if any?
Yeah, and I'll tag on to that. I think we all have experienced that. Whatever we are doing right is not getting communicated, and each of us is getting understandably beat up. There is a keen interest from the community about getting as close to that 90% no kill. I know Macy has spoken to this out of experience professionally as well. And we have a major deficit, and our community, especially those that volunteer in our animal clinics, our animal shelters, are very upset. And so what do we do to close the gap there is incredibly important. And I do think communication is a piece of that. I know there's been some work behind the scenes. I just haven't been briefed on that in a while. So
Or even more support with spay and neuter.
Absolutely.
Um,
Agreed.
So this would be for the city secretary. Hear about the process to add resolutions as a recognition option through city council meetings. And HR, I'd like to explore the idea of adopting a school, specifically the lowest performing school in the city, and through different programs, maybe a pen pal, maybe help raising money for the PTA, or just different ideas. So those are my three.
Thanks, Jeanette. Elizabeth?
I've got one, and it's kind of highly specific. It might be better as a presentation, but we have the boarding home ordinance, we have the short-term rental ordinance, we have the lodging home ordinance, and they're all kind of different. And so if we could get a presentation on what each of those are, how we police them, how we report them, and what we can do to better help our residents navigate that system. Also, from report to worst case resolution, what are we looking at? 90 days, 60 days, 120 days, because our office gets inundated, and it doesn't seem like anyone knows the difference between any of them.
Can I add on to that? And
Yes.
probably put like the TCU overlay and how that's reported, et cetera, so
Yes.
people understand that process.
Yes.
What's legal, what's not.
Jared, and then Charlie.
Awesome, thanks, Mayor. I want to follow up on today's informal report on the business equity program with the presentation. And specifically, I would like to kind of hear from not only diversity, but city management on how we're gonna, how are we addressing availability? I know we do a lot of work with the Black Chamber and the Hispanic Chamber through a grant that we award to them to assist with that. But is there something we could do to do better there? I'm a little concerned about 79% of all of our contracts going to non-MBE, and the 5% number, while a huge leap and bound away from less than 1%, I think we could do more. So I would love to, for this body to have a presentation and then more discussion on what we can do.
Thank you. Charlie?
So I just have a couple, I don't know if they'd be presentations or a report or what, but I think with Veterans Day coming up, I think it's a good time to talk about it. And that's getting some more information for what the city of Fort Worth is actually doing for veterans. For example, I know that we have the Forward Home Program and the Fund for Veterans Assistance, which are both through the Texas Veterans Commission, which I think is great. We just accepted a $600,000 check from the Veterans Commission for that, for Fort Worth residents. So something to show like, hey, here's exactly how these programs work. Here's how you can tap into those resources, especially with the holidays coming up. If we can get something in the interim out quickly that we can get out to residents, especially as we move into the holiday season, which is prime time for veteran suicide. And of course, with cold weather, we have a lot of Vietnam veterans, a lot of World War II veterans who may need some of these assistance from some of these programs. So some sort of report on what we're doing. And then also on veteran-owned small businesses and services disabled to veteran-owned small businesses, understanding that we might not be able to add those to the business equity firms because of what they are, but what the city can do in terms of offering some sort of incentives, sort of like we did at the federal level, since they do fall under historically underutilized businesses with the federal government. I'm hoping we might be able to do something more. So that's kind of what I would like to see.
Great. Alan, and then back to Michael.
So I would just like an informal report as an update on the payroll system.
Michael?
Sure. Continuing some of the work we've done with the Small Business Task Force, now rolled up into entrepreneurship and innovation. The Development Service Department has done a report on some of the recommendations that the Institute for Justice report talked about. So I'd like an IR, and they can incorporate some of what they've done, but I want my colleagues to see all this in a formal way of our grease traps and what we can do specifically there for some of our businesses. There seems to be maybe some work that we can do there. And I'd like to have that discussion. And then secondarily, our permitting fees and an overall discussion about how they lay out, so we can have a discussion about moving forward into a new budget year, what we might be able to do there.
Okay. Any others from council? I have two. The first is I would like us to work with staff and Tara and Victor Turner and others on some type of homelessness workshop alongside Tarrant County Homeless Coalition and the COC. I'm open-minded whether or not that's the entire council in a full public meeting, or if it's best to keep that in a smaller setting. We all get questions about our work in homelessness. We've made some terrific strides, but it's something we have to stay on top of. And then importantly, as part of that meeting, how we're communicating the work we're doing across the city of Fort Worth. The second one is kind of dovetails onto what Jeanette described. But more specifically, I think we should outreach, this would be cumbersome, but we can work with staff, to each of the schools across Fort Worth, that's 12 school districts. We can decide to start maybe in pyramids, I can work with staff on ideas, but what I'm most interested in is understanding the schools that are serving the most at-risk population, specifically asking a school, how many children do you anticipate, you expect are living couch surfing, are homeless? What are your major issues that are affecting your families? Do you have the resources you think you need in your school? The answer will be no, because I think this council can really rally support for each of those individual schools where needed. And I can work with staff on kind of what that looks like, but I think a communication from our office could get a better response directly from our schools. But I would like to work with each of you individually, because you probably know the schools that probably need to be contacted first as first priority, and we can tier those appropriately. That sounds good. Gina.
Mayor, I wholeheartedly support that first portion of your request. I'm hoping staff could do a quick turnaround so that we can get that out before the count
Yeah.
takes place.
Yes.
And it would show us in sync with what's going on around us.
Yes, completely agree. Any other questions, council? Okay, that's it. Meeting adjourned. Thank you.
All right, everybody. It's 7 minutes after 9:30, and let's get started with the Ad hoc Council Committee on Emergency Medical Response. Now call the meeting to order. And to start with, let's see, we have an overview and follow-ups from Hillary Schein from what the Ad hoc Committee did on our September 12th meeting. Hillary?
All right, good morning. It's been a minute since we have been together, and we had one specific follow-up, but then there were a lot of pieces of information that had been requested, which is what is contained in your handy-dandy binder here. And so I don't know if you all have had a chance to thumb through, but hopefully it is complete with the expectations that you set at the last meeting. And if not, please let us know if there's any other data that you need us to provide for you. But the outstanding item that we had was the setting of baseline response times. We were intending to tackle that earlier. And so now we're going to do it today. And I want to set this up with, this is point in time, this is today. So what we really are trying to do is to establish the framework with which we expect MedStar's response and FHIR's response to operate over the next few months until we can transition to whatever is a more acceptable standard when we move to some new system. So we're trying to establish some sort of accountability and stability so that as we move through this process, we can kind of maintain at least where we are so that we don't lose ground with regard to response. And so I'm going to ask Chief Horton to actually walk us through. There's a PowerPoint presentation related to response times and where we are currently. So again, this is current time. Obviously, we want response times to be as good as they can be, but what we want to do is just establish this baseline for now.
Good morning, Chief.
Good morning. Thank you, Mayor and members of the committee. We'll get this pulled up and we'll go through it.
And it's tab 1 in your binder.
Okay, again, as Hillary mentioned, this was kind of historical going back to what was done with Citygate and kind of where we got today. Just making sure that you understand some of the terminology and where we get some of the different information from. I'm not going to read all these to you, but some of the key ones here, we have ALS, Advanced Life Support, BLS, Basic Life Support, the fractile time, I don't see fractile. Oh, fractile, percentage of goal, 90%. So one of the things that Citygate said was we need to start measuring everything at the 90th percentile instead of looking at averages and some of those things. NFPA, National Fire Protection Association, where we get some of our standards. And then crew turnout, and it is a process from the time the 911 call comes into the city until we get resources on the scene. So we want to look at every one of those steps individually as we go through this process to make sure that we are good in each of those areas.